Good morning. Cindy Eriks here, and I would like to talk to you about your mold assessment protocol report and what to do with it, how to read it, and how to talk with your mold remediator when you're getting estimates. So the first page is very self-explanatory, describes the property, your name, what the scope of services are, which you would have signed a scope of services contract as required by our professional liability carrier that goes into great detail about what we do and don't do, the history and background, whatever information that we were provided. Let me say this while I'm on that section. Frequently people forget things that had happened in the past with water damage, roof leaks, kitchen sink leaks, vanity sink leaks, tub leaks, water heater leaks, air conditioning leaks. Even when we ask them, they frequently say no. They'll say one or none, and then describe it to us, and then later on it will come up either in the inspection or long after, sometimes in the post-remediation inspection, because it's not passing a clearance and there's mold, hidden mold in another place, another part of the property that we didn't know had water damage previously. Because if you have water damage to anything touching sheetrock or wood, base trim, etc., ceilings, then the likelihood of mold being present there is very high, especially in Florida, because of the high outside humidity, and the wall cavities have higher humidity, and mold will grow really quickly, especially if wet sheetrock and base trim aren't removed right away when they get wet. So I have a video I did about that, several videos. Look around the website, indoorqualitymatters.com, or my YouTube channel, Cindy Eriks, and I have some videos to tell you what to do when your sheetrock gets wet, because your insurance company is frequently not going to do the right thing when they send out a dry out company. They won't pull the wet sheetrock. They'll dry it in place, and by the time that gets dry, the sheetrock that was up against the bottom plate, the stud, the horizontal stud at the very base of the wall, there's already mold growing there. And so that comes up a lot. So a history is really important. So we're going to rely on whatever information that was provided. Sometimes a lot of information can't be provided because it's not known. Not enough has been known about the property history. And so we go with what we have, and then we see how our visual inspection, moisture readings, laboratory analysis reads. And so anyway, after that you'll see on the next page, you'll see the conditions usually that were present at the time of inspection relative to relative humidity and temperature inside and out, and then a disclaimer about the building contents and appliances. We don't move those things, so you may have hidden damage behind an appliance or behind furniture, up against the walls and things like that, that we wouldn't be able to see. We don't want to really move your stuff, because if we move your stuff and damage property, then we're going to be responsible for repairing that property. And so then you'll have a, usually, not always, but an inspection summary that kind of gives you an overview of what we observed there, and the kind of things that are going to be required to remediate it. But those things are also will be listed in the protocol section of the report. And then there's a page for the sampling that we did. Usually we'll do air samples and surface samples, occasionally only surface, but we'll almost always do some surface, unless it's a clearance and it's perfectly clean and there's no signs of any visible mold on the clearance. And then we'll usually only do an air sample and visual observation and photograph those observations to verify that everything was, all the surfaces were clean. We're not going to take a sample on a surface that doesn't have anything to sample. Okay, so that's a waste of time. I've seen people do it to prove that they did a good job, but that doesn't prove you did a good job. So the samples, it'll explain about the samples, and it'll say if there's any elevated mold in samples, and there's a couple of categories for that. One is common mold spores that we find in the outside air very commonly, and the others are more specific to water damaged building materials. And so if we don't see any water damaged building materials, but your levels are coming back with water damage molds, then the hunt is on, and usually that'll be reflected in this report, and likely right in the summary also. The next section is the mold remediation protocol, and it'll describe what the protocol is required. And it starts out with containment. Now, what containment means is if you have a problem in your kitchen, or just say your bathroom vanity or your kitchen, and you've got those are very common things to have areas to have problems. If you have a specific area like that that needs to be remediated, the room needs to be contained, or at least a section of the room that includes that area that has elevated mold. Sometimes the kitchen is rather large, and you could cut the kitchen in half and put a barrier up. So the containment will involve a floor to ceiling usually. There's an exception to every single thing I say. Sometimes we come up with other ways to do it, especially if there's vaulted ceilings and so forth. Sometimes you'd build an encasement, but I'm just saying generally most of the time kind of thing. It'll be floor to ceiling. It'll usually be with poles to hold it tight, sealed very tightly, and sometimes the remediator needs to use like a Gorilla Tape, something really heavy duty, and that on the ceiling will cause damage to the surface, so that's going to have to be included in the repair. Okay, just expect to have some damage wherever that adhesive is placed, because you need the tightest containment possible. And so it has to be plastic, floor to ceiling, a zipper door, in some cases a clean room, which would be a room that's plastic, wall, ceiling, and in that room another zipper, and in that room would be a HEPA air scrubber. And there's always a HEPA air scrubber inside the area that's being worked on, and a dehumidifier, and always a HEPA air scrubber outside of the containment. And if the HVAC, the air conditioning system, can't be in use to moderate and keep that humidity low down around 50, 55 most in the rest of the house, because you have to shut down the system, then the whole house needs to be dehumidified so that you don't end up growing mold in other parts of the property that didn't already have mold, because elevated humidity will cause common mold spores that we bring in from the outside air to grow. And so we don't want to cause a problem, because containment, and the next thing, I'm kind of overlapping containment and engineering controls. Engineering controls do mean the HEPA air scrubbers, negative pressure, and dehumidification. Now, not every room would need negative pressure, but it's a good idea in most cases to get negative pressure. And what that means is there's a tubing, almost like a big duct, that goes on the end of the HEPA air scrubber, and it draws it to an outside location, like out a window. So it'll be drawing everything out. Sometimes a little positive pressure on the outside, especially if there's a real great concern about cross-contaminating the rest of the property. So sometimes you don't have a window or doors or an opening like that to work with to have negative pressure. But if they can, that's ideal. Okay. So also because the air inside the drawing, right, that negative can actually cause the seals to be pulled on floor and ceiling. And so sometimes we'll put a opening in the plastic that has a HEPA filter in it, so that the air can move, but then anything that comes and goes is trapped by the HEPA filter. Okay, so every room that is getting mold remediation performed is going to need a containment and those engineering controls: HEPA air scrubber, dehumidifier. Frequently, they won't bring the machine in, or they might bring it into the space when they do the containment. And that's why sometimes the containment needs to be bigger than you think it needs to be, because it needs to be able to hold these big machines that are dehumidifiers and the air scrubber. They're pretty sizable machines. There's smaller ones and bigger ones, but a lot of the companies have, big machines. And so this is the reason also why nobody's allowed inside that containment except the site workers for the mold remediation company. And we get customers breaching those all the time because they're curious and they want to see what's going on in that space. It's not good, because anybody could walk into that building or that house and have come from a very moldy environment that they didn't even know was moldy, get mold on them, and bring it into the space. And now then they breach and they go in, and then they bring mold. Maybe the job's almost done. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's half done. It doesn't matter. There's reasons for keeping people out of that space, because it has to be totally controlled by the remediator so that they could pass their clearance. Okay? Now, they should, by the way, I'm just going to add this now while I'm thinking of it while we're on the subject, but the clearance should pass the first time, but on average, about 25% of first clearance fail. And it's just the nature of mold. But it should not be because the remediator did not follow the protocol, and I'll get into that with you in a few minutes. But it should not be because the remediator did not follow the protocol. All of the protocol that we're writing in this is required to be followed, unless the remediator contacts us and says, I have a little different way I'd like to do it, let's talk about it. We're glad to talk about it. We don't know everything there is to know, and sometimes there's a better idea about approaching a problem. And especially where it pertains to people being displaced from their homes, we like to try to come up with solutions that'll help you not be displaced, but sometimes you have to be displaced. It's just the only way it's going to get done to be certain it's going to get done properly and expediently. Okay, you don't want your mold project going on for a month. Okay, it's not necessary in 99% of cases. Okay, so not breaching that containment, having the engineering controls in place. The whole house needs to be maintained at under 55% or under relative humidity. It must, and it becomes a challenge because people don't do what I'm about to tell you, and I have a video on it. But in our region, in Florida, in North Florida, the winters have become very, very humid. And if you're not running a dehumidifier when you can't run your air conditioner, or you can't run your air conditioner long enough to take the humidity out of the air, then you can create a problem in your building. Okay, so then it'll address content items if that's pertinent. Sometimes it's just the content items need to be pulled to a certain section of the room, covered tightly and sealed for protection. It just depends on how the samples came back as to whether or not anything needs to be done with the contents as far as wiping them down or cleaning them. And then the next section is the removal of building materials. And most of the time you've got sometimes carpet, padding, tack strip. If you're removing carpet and padding, tack strip has to go. Sometimes it's sheetrock walls, base trim. The sheetrock must be removed 2 feet past the last visible from the technician pulling the sheetrock, because what we see when we're there may be right here, but it may go much farther behind the wall, have traveled. It's just frequent occurrence. So we have this written in a lot of places, 2 feet beyond the visible mold. That's not a guarantee. We've had situations where the person didn't report, the owner didn't report a problem. They didn't really see it as a problem, but we kept getting a fail. And on a room, on this dining room that was adjacent to a bathroom, and the bathroom, we remediated. We wrote a protocol to remediate the bathroom, outside the bathroom into the dining room, and then it was failing the test with Chaetomium mold spores. And come to find out that the mold remediator got so frustrated, he's like, I can't see anything anywhere. He did like a 2 foot or a 4 foot cut from the floor up. They call it a flood cut from the floor up around the room, and on the totally opposite side of the room, there was the mold. Had nothing to do with this loss that we were called in for, and it was dry. It was totally dry. But then the owner said, oh yeah, when we bought the house, the seller said there had been a roof leak. It came down through the floors. Okay, so stuff like that happens. You can't prepare for it if you don't know about it. But that's why the history. And I'll often ask if it's a newer purchase. I'll say, do you have a copy of the seller's disclosure? That doesn't mean that everybody's going to report everything because they forget. Some people try to hide, but most of the time people just forget. They don't think of it. It wasn't a big event. They've owned the house for 30 years and they don't remember everything there is to know. So the next section will be removal of materials, and that's pretty self-explanatory. And then the next section is the cleaning of building materials, how they're supposed to be cleaned, what they're supposed to be cleaned, or if they're supposed to be sealed. And then the next section is your HVAC, what needs to be done with that. Does it just need to be sealed off because it wasn't affected by the loss, or does the whole system need cleaning? Frequently we find that whole systems need cleaning, and sometimes the ducts need to be replaced if they can't be cleaned, because flex duct is really, really hard to guarantee cleaning. So, after that, we have a little section right before we sign the report, and it talks about getting 2 to 3 estimates. We recommend that you get 2 to 3 estimates. And it says hire your remediator with due diligence, asking questions. And we have a real problem with remediators not following the protocol, or not wanting to follow the protocol but not saying so. And then they go in to do the job. Customer calls us back to clear it, and we walk through the door and we start looking, and there's visible mold on sheetrock. There's visible mold on wall sheathing once the sheetrock was removed. There's visible mold in the HVAC that they just left and thought that was okay. It's not okay, and we say so in the report. It's not okay. So and also we'll be glad to review. It's if there's a fee for it, but we'll be glad to review 1 to 3 estimates for $150 consult fee. We will review your estimate compared to the protocol and see if there's any line items in there that aren't in there, or that are in there and shouldn't be in there, because that happens sometimes. Like, the remediator will read the report and they'll think that, well, the whole house had to be wiped down, but they didn't really see the wording in there that said it didn't. Okay, and so I know that sounds strange, but it's just something that happens. And so you may have an extra $8,000 in your bill that doesn't need to be there. So it'd be in your best interest to you scouring over the protocol as well as the estimate, to make sure that everything is on there and there's nothing extra on there. Most people, can do that. Some people just don't want to do that, and so that's why we offer it, but it does take us time, so that's why we charge for it. And so the next section, you'll see photographs. We take photographs of the outside HVAC, the label on the HVAC, because there's air conditioning problems frequently these days with tonnage and age and things like that. And so every area that we inspected, every problem area is in there, to just show all the places that we saw water damage or mold, and all the places that we went. And then after that, you're going to have the lab report, which is, they're kind of hard to read, so you just need to go by what we say based on, I'll tell you, the best thing you can do is compare it. If you really want to do it quickly and you want to look at the labs, you can take the labs and compare them to the end of the report, which I'll get to in just a second. So then there's an attachment called 3 pages of requirements on all mold remediation projects. This is an attachment that we attach to every mold remediation project because it is required on all remediation projects. So don't overlook reading that really good. So, like, for instance, there's things in here that you just wouldn't even think of. Okay, if you run into decay, if the remediator runs into wood decay, well, wood decay is mold. It got there because of water damage, and then that water damage through the mold process broke down the material. So wood rot is mold. And so frequently, if it's an exterior wall and the sheetrock gets removed, there's sheathing behind it that's OSB sheathing, the oriented strand board. It's pretty common nowadays to be on the exterior sheathing, and it's decayed. And sometimes you got to take off siding to get to that. And sometimes it's just a small spot that could be chiseled out and fixed. But In either event, we'll try to help you brainstorm if you get to that and it looks like it's going to be a monstrous situation. We'll be glad to try to come up with a solution that'll work and still be adequate to keep the building envelope secure, because that's what it needs. That's the envelope is the outside, and that needs to be sealed. It needs to be sealed properly without mold toxins in the walls that could get inside easily. And so on that page, on the third page of the 3-page attachment, there's a section that says, sorry, it's the fourth page. It's 1, 2, 3. It's the third page. The third page, it has post-remediation test and inspection guidelines. Look at that. Total spore counts, less than 1,000 spores per cubic meter. Inside count, no greater than outside reading if taken. Won't exceed the original assessment levels. No Penicillium aspergillus, 1,000 spores per cubic meter. No Cladosporium curvularia eucladium. They've got a bunch of molds here, more than 200 each. No Stachybotrys, Chaetomium, Mammanelia, Fusarium, Alternaria, Trichoderma at any levels. Now, exception is written in here as a stray. There could be one stray spore just that was floating around from the job, and we'll usually pass it if it has that. Debris rating of 3 or lower, which means if we do an air sample and it has a high debris rating, it's hard for the lab to really get a good sample reading on that, and that means that the air wasn't cleaned real well, right? And so then humidity well controlled, 40 to 50% in the entire conditioned space. Now, we would be okay up to 55% in areas that aren't being remediated, okay? But inside the remediated areas, it really needs to be, lower, much lower. HEPA air scrubbers inside and outside of containment. No dust or debris on any surfaces, because this means the surface was not cleaned. I can't tell you how frequently we see this. And the mold spores settle in dust and debris. So, containment. All rooms where building materials were being removed require a containment. That's just kind of a repeat. And then there's a whole explanation on what containment means right here, okay? Like I explained to you earlier. And a big letter is, please call your mold assessor to discuss any concerns about the protocol. But we ask that you read it, every page, and that you look at this video before you call us. Because some people just call up and say, well, tell me what the report said. I'm like, did you read it? No, we didn't read it. We just want you to tell us what. I said, that's going to take, we'll be on the phone another hour. We're trying to help other customers. The next page that's attached, we just do this as a courtesy to every customer, maintenance recommendations. So these are general maintenance recommendations. Now, if we had specific maintenance recommendations for your property, we would have put that possibly in the observations or right before the mold protocol, okay? But this is general for every property, okay? Talking about using moisture sensors to detect water damage right away, like instantly when it happens. Monitoring your indoor humidity with the humidity gauge, using a dehumidifier when it goes above 55, so that you never putting the fan in the on position on the cooling system, on the HVAC system, because that'll always generate humidity and mold in warmer climates where you've got any water in the pan. It just uptakes it back into the property. And we have some HVAC contractors telling people, you always have to put your fan on. I'm like, no, don't put your fan on. Not in Florida, not in the Southeast, not in warm and humid climates. Do not put your fan on, okay? Do not put your fan on. Why they even let you have that as an option, I have no idea. Things like that, keeping leaves and debris off your roof and keeping water away from the foundation walls, inspecting your crawl space periodically. Check the YouTube channel for other videos about, how we teach about things. And then I've got attached to this, I did a 10-year study on humidity, and that's where I came up with the elevated humidity in the winter. As soon as it hits October, November in Tallahassee, Florida, and that whole region, the humidity is rising with occasional drops. It used to be it dropped and we had occasional humidity, but it's kind of reversed itself. So this talks about how to deal with that with your dehumidifier in the house, and tracking your humidity and constantly looking at it, and other things, other living habits that will affect your indoor humidity and how to deal with those. The last couple of pages are purely description, visual photographs with description on how a containment's put together, what it looks like, actually what it looks like, right? What the negative pressure looks like going out a window, so that you could see in great detail what that HEPA filter in the wall of the containment looks like, so that you can understand it. So I would also recommend, I think what I'm going to be adding to very soon, I'm going to be adding, you may already have this, but a document that you get your mold remediator to sign, that they are going to, like kind of like a contract, they're going to do everything on the protocol for X amount of money. The only exception would be is to hidden damage that they discover after they have removed materials and saw that there's extra damage, and then your assessor comes and verifies that either by photographs, or we go and do another inspection for that additional fee of those problems. You should only have to pay for one mold clearance test and inspection. If the remediator fails because they did not follow the protocol, you should not have to pay for that, and you should get reimbursed. We're not going to bill the remediator, we will bill you, and payment, of course, is due at the time that we do the testing and inspection. So you'll have to get that back from the remediator by taking it off the bill or whatever. But we just recommend that you take a look around the website, indoораirqualitymatters.com, and see some of the videos we have posted. They're linked back to the YouTube channel, my general variety channel, which I have a lot of topics on there. But I also have, the mold topics and the water damage and the indoor air quality, amongst many other things, some other environmental topics. Just please, once you've had a chance to look at that, listen to this video, watch this video, I encourage you to share the video with your remediator, and so that they know what to expect, and that there's no questions or doubts. We have a real short list on remediators that we recommend, because we're not going to recommend people that don't follow or are just obstinate and don't want to follow the protocol. We have many of those. There's many mold remediators now. The market's flooded with them that don't want to do the right thing, and it's against the law. Our license is governed by a law, the 468 statutes. We are licensed through the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. You're either licensed as a mold assessor or a mold remediator. I would not recommend hiring one necessarily that does both. You certainly can't do both on a property, even if you don't charge for it. There's some out there that say, oh, if I don't charge for it, I can do an assessment. It's a conflict of interest is why it's written. It's a conflict of interest to go out and inspect a property and say, oh, this is what's wrong. Oh, and this is how much I'll charge you to fix that problem. And we've seen some of these people where they said people had a problem and they didn't have a problem. They said somebody had a problem but wouldn't explain how involved that problem was, would not provide a real protocol. Okay, we're seeing a lot of that, and just say, here's an estimate for what needs to be done. And then sometimes the customer gets suspicious, and at the end they call us to come out. Even if they've hired one of those people, they've called us, and then that person actually does their own clearance inspection and report, which is absolutely a conflict of interest. And so we've had a couple of situations recently where the customers called us back and said, well, they did their own. They said they did a good job, and here's their labs and everything. And that's where I saw one lab was a tape slide up against a very clean piece of wood stud. Why are you taking a sample of a clean piece of wood? I mean, that's proving, and they had zero mold in it. It's like, yeah, of course it has zero mold in it. It's a clean piece of wood. So anyway, we don't operate like that, and you shouldn't let anybody do that to you. And so